title is Sustaining Manufacturing Skills by Sharing Wisdom, though I'm sure you saw it from the place in front of me. I'm obviously not Shoshana. Unfortunately, she was called away for a personal emergency, so I'm taking over. My name's Rose. I'm part of the Make UK team. I've been in the policy team for just over a year and a half, and I work in employment and skills with Jamie, who's our lead on the panel. But I also specialise in inclusion. In my spare time, I do a bit of coaching for rowing, and I spend a lot of time working with British Rowing on how to improve their cultural practices to include neurodivergent individuals. So that's kind of why I'm so passionate about making sure that we secure that intergenerational communication. In terms of our panel, I think I'll just let them introduce themselves to you. This is Simon, well, I'll introduce them by name, but they'll introduce themselves. Simon, Jamie, and Alexia, and I'll let them take it away.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Simon. Excuse me. I am the event director for a few trade shows here in the UK, one of those being Advanced Engineering, Lab Innovations, and Southern Manufacturing and Electronics. I'm also a judge for the Make UK Apprenticeships Awards, which has been an absolute phenomenal opportunity in the last 6 months to interview so many apprentices, so many talented young people and older. Hopefully I can share some insights from some of those conversations and views. So yes, I'm pleased to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Cater. As Rose says, I lead on employment and skills policy for Make UK. So leading all of our work with government, politicians, policymakers on everything to do with sort of manufacturing workforces and workplaces. So trying to ensure that we are engaging with government, creating that link between government and industry to create the policy that will give us the kind of framework to achieve the skills that industry needs.
Hi, I'm Alexia. I'm a technical lead at Rolls-Royce. I started my career as an aerospace degree apprentice, moved on to do a master's engineering apprenticeship, and now I'm in the position I'm in. I've done defence aerospace for the last 6 years. Now I work in submarines, and I was the Make UK Engineering Apprentice Rising Star for 2023. As well as that, I'm on the Board of Trustees at Engenuity, and I'm a non-executive director for EAL, which is one of the UK's leading awarding organisations for engineering qualifications.
Fab. So in terms of the session today, just a quick idea of what we're doing before I pass over to Jamie. We're going to do a breakout after Jamie's spoken about the issues with intergenerational communication and what that means for skills. We'll have a couple of reflections from our panellists, and then I'll introduce you to our apprentices who just sat over there. They'll be floating around the tables for the rest of today to kind of feedback their experiences and hopefully shape your responses while we have this discussion. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Jamie to talk us through.
Thanks, Rose. And I think it probably won't come as a surprise to the people in this room that this kind of core question that we're thinking about today in terms of intergenerational communication, and particularly that question of kind of sharing knowledge and skills within the business is an increasingly critical part of how we think about skills in industry and how we talk about that with government in policy terms. So we know from our research that 37% of manufacturers identify what they might call employability skills, life skills, softer skills, social, emotional communication skills as one of the biggest challenges in recruiting young people in particular and young apprentices in particular. And nearly 2/3 of manufacturers say that those sorts of skills, they just increasingly see the relevance of those, not just that they're in shortage, but that they're becoming increasingly important in the workplace. Those of you who were here this morning will have heard Stephen talk a little bit about our industrial strategy skills commission, and as part of that work I've had the privilege with the members of the commission and some others in the Make UK team of going out and about and seeing some of the manufacturers who are doing really brilliant work in terms of kind of innovation and investment in skills training. And one of the examples that stood out to me during that work, we went up to David Nieper in Alfreton in Derbyshire. I'm not sure Christopher's in the room. I think, no, he is at the conference. But they are a small textile manufacturer. They've done loads of brilliant work in skills and employment, but a key part of that has been them taking over sponsorship of a local school. And what they've been able to do is embed what they call kind of employability skills throughout the curriculum. So not just it kind of sitting slightly separately as an add-on, but it goes through all of the different subjects that the pupils will study. And we had the opportunity on that visit to talk to some of the school pupils, to hear about the work that they'd been doing. And it was so just incredible, really, to hear these kids, some of them as young as sort of 11 or 12, talking really kind of articulately about not just the work that they'd been doing, but how they saw the value of acquiring those skills and the work that they'd done in terms of what they might think their future career would be, how they would apply them in the workplace. And I think what that business and what that school has managed to do is kind of stop this thing kind of becoming a list of sort of buzzwords on a worksheet that someone might work through. But it was really clear that these kids sort of understood, you know, how their approach to teamwork, collaboration, sort of challenging each other, establishing roles in the team, who was going to be the leader, who was supporting on specific tasks, playing to each other's strengths, all of this stuff which requires actually really quite mature communication, and is really kind of developing those skills. They could understand actually what the kind of real world application of those skills would be through kind of working on their own projects. And so they were able to explain really clearly and express themselves really articulately in terms of the work that they'd done, how they'd gone about it, why they'd done it in a particular way. And it was just, it was really incredibly impressive. So taking employability skills, whatever term you want to use to describe that, and thinking about it for those young people, not just in an abstract way, but in a really kind of practical way, where they really fully understand the relevance and importance of that. I think to look at things from the other side, what we also know from our membership is, and I think it's come up once or twice in other sessions today, is the gap in leadership and management skills, and where we see a particular challenge, I think, for businesses across the manufacturing sector in getting good people managers, line managers, and so people who might be kind of supervising, mentoring apprentices, who feel able to communicate in the right way, you know, have potentially difficult, sensitive conversations, you know, and just give those young people and those apprentices the right support. So we see those kind of two challenges. On one hand, making sure that young people coming out of the education system, coming into, say, an apprenticeship, you know, into the workplace for the first time, that they have the confidence and the communication skills to feel comfortable in the workplace and kind of do what they need to do and communicate with their fellow employees in the right way, but also that the people in the business taking on the kind of responsibility of managing them, supervising them, mentoring them, also feel comfortable with communicating with those young people and feel that they know how to give them the right support. So we see both of those things perhaps as being a sort of equal challenge. I'm looking forward to kind of discussing both of those things in our conversations.
Brilliant. And if I could just bounce similar reflections over to Simon and Alexia, and then I'll introduce the apprentices.
Yeah, so communications and sort of that link between the younger people within a company and the senior, having been an apprentice myself, coming in, one of the main things that sort of made an impact for me was actually having a team that knew what an apprentice does. and what their abilities are and what's involved with having someone that's on an apprenticeship scheme or an internship or a graduate scheme. And my first placement in a business, if I had just taken the whole business perspective off of that first placement, I probably would have left after being at Rolls-Royce for 6 months. My first placement wasn't great. The people in the team had never had an apprentice before. They were never briefed about what to expect from an apprentice. They didn't even know that I was going to be out 1 day a week for university until I told them, and the line manager was like, sorry, what? I'm not getting free labour 5 days a week. So for me, communication is a huge thing for managers to reiterate and sort of educate the people within the organisation around what do you need to do to support an apprentice, what's required, and making sure that actually the apprentice also is aware of what's required of them in the role and what they're going to be working on and doing, because especially if it's one of their first or second placements within the organisation, they're never probably going to have worked in a business before. They're not going to know what to expect, what to see. They probably have not experienced even working the sort of the times that's required, because at school you still work a lot shorter days than we do in the offices. So it's just all communication is just the huge thing around actually how we keep people within organisations and the retention of apprentices, because that's a huge thing at the moment, is actually how many people finishing an apprenticeship and then stay on at that organisation. Retention rates are really low. Completion rates on apprenticeships are very low. They're only 52% actually finish an apprenticeship that they start. So yeah, that's my view on communication, keeping apprentices.
I suppose to add to that, I mean, there is listening while you're doing the judging for the awards, you ask that particular question, like how can we improve? And that comes out quite regularly in terms of communication amongst the colleges and the organisations, and actually what's going on with those apprentices, like day to day, week by week, and so on. And I can see that pops up quite a lot. And in the bigger organisations, actually some of them have got it right, and then obviously it doesn't always work. But it must be a real challenge for SMEs, even more so, you know, having that conduit between the college and the actual line manager, the person that's looking after that particular apprentice. So that definitely is a huge challenge. Something that just, you know, because it's good for us to get down to the discussion, but something that I've listened to and heard about is about the vision, you know, giving clarity for the apprentice and exactly where they're going, what roles, opportunities there are, exposing them to many parts of the business does help. And then lastly, which we talked about in the last session, but I'll bring it up now because it's quite good, is reverse mentorship. So actually the apprentices mentoring the CEOs and the C-suites within the owners in the business makes a big difference. That will give you some really good insight on how you are, you know, and they might even help you change what you do. So yeah, that would be my thoughts.
Brilliant, thank you. In terms of introductions, I'm going to bring the apprentices up if you'd like to come and introduce yourselves, and then we'll talk about breaking into groups now.
Hello, I'm Alfie Stanley. I work for Summit Pattern Making. All I really do is program and operate machinery. Day to day, it's simple things, could be complex. No job's the same. Every day is different in engineering. Every company's different. Your bigger companies, jobs are the same usually. You can get on with it. You're not really as bugged about what's going on. When you come to your smaller companies, your jobs are, you get nagged a lot. That needs to be coming out there. Everything needs to be done on time. Perfect. That's all we got to do, really.
I'm Lucy. I work for Sarine, an electronic testing company. They produce end-of-line testing equipment and assisted manufacturing. But like, as Alfie's just said, a small company again, you can be doing one thing one day and something completely different the next, which is brilliant when you're training, because you go out of that job and potentially you know a lot more than someone that was doing the same job every day for the time you're training. So.
My name's Liam. I'm an apprentice for JLR. I applied for an apprenticeship because I was a bit too stubborn to do paperwork, and then I ended up doing more paperwork than I've ever done in my life. So that was a bit of a surprise for me. At JLR, where it's a bigger company, for the first couple months, you're basically a cleaner. You just clean up after the older lot, and then after they start teaching you small stuff. And then over time, you start to pick up more and more things, more safety things, and then I end up teaching them about safety, like, maybe you shouldn't use that ladder over there, but because they've been doing it for years, they don't listen. And then something happens and then they listen. But yeah, I would say I enjoy my apprenticeship because it's more hands-on, and I don't really learn very well when I'm on paper. So I think it would be a very good thing if we can start pushing out more, that you can learn in more different ways and it's not a third option. But it's actually a good first option for those that learn in different ways than they do at school.
In terms of what we're going to do next, just going to have a quick chat through with our panellists, see what they've learned, and then if anyone's got any burning questions, we'll have a couple of minutes for a Q&A, and that applies equally to the apprentices as it does to the panellists. So, guys, what did you find?
I had a fascinating chat. The table was absolutely fantastic. One thing that just popped up, which I think I didn't know about, so I'm going to excuse me on this one, but there's a business called Warren Services. I don't know if there's anyone from Warren Services here, but they're a good example of looking after young people through apprenticeships. And so this gentleman over here was just explaining how they swap apprentices, the levy, with Aviva, and how that really has helped them. And they've been doing that for years. And it's something I'm going to look into. So I don't know how that fits in, but that sounds really interesting. But there were some really good examples of how there's areas of issues with line managers or people that are running the apprentices, how that can be quite challenging on their time, and how important it is to train those people in order for them to be retained. Yeah, there was plenty there, and I'm wary of time, but yeah, this is really, it was a really good example of there are some positive wants from the way the apprentices are used in these businesses, but it's going to be, I think there's some challenges coming up with the 1st of April announcements around apprenticeships levies and so on. But yeah, that's from me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think 3 things that stood out to me from the conversation on our table. One was the particular challenge that maybe people with line management or kind of supervisory responsibilities, particularly with engaging with young people who might have, I guess, in particular sort of mental health issues, goes back, I think, in part to the point I was making earlier around the real challenge we see in the sector more broadly around kind of people managers, line managers, knowing how to have actually really quite difficult, sensitive conversations, making people feel comfortable and able to share or disclose things that are actually kind of really tricky to deal with, those managers having the knowledge and understanding as well to signpost people to the right support, whatever it might be. So I think a real challenge there. There's a really interesting point around kind of young people, young apprentices coming into the business and having contact not just with kind of other employees, but in particular people who have been through some of those apprenticeship training routes themselves quite recently, so that they know they kind of have people alongside them who kind of understand actually what it means to be doing what they're doing and going on the journey that they are. Just I suppose the ability for those relationships to give a different kind of support for those apprentices. And then finally we touched on, and it's a bit broader in terms of the system, but the importance of having regular touch points throughout someone's kind of educational pathway, and not kind of from an employer industry perspective, not reaching those kind of young people too late, but that there are ongoing opportunities to shape those young people's perceptions of industry, their understanding of what their future jobs, career development opportunities might look like. And that's part, again, of kind of improving that intergenerational kind of communication and mutual understanding by just developing that kind of better appreciation of job roles, expectations and that kind of thing. So those are the three things that stood out to me from our conversation.
Yeah, so we had quite a good conversation on our table around what we're doing well at the moment within our business in terms of working with that younger generation. And a couple of things that came up, one of them was around actually, is the organisation ready to take on an apprentice and take on a younger person? Are we taking them on when actually our management hasn't got enough time to support them properly? We haven't actually got the funding to help them do additional training that's not included within their sort of apprenticeship standard and the apprentice levy funding, and making sure that when we do actually take on apprentices, and whether we take on 1 or we take on 10, is making sure that actually the management and the teams that are going to be working with that apprentice also have the time to support them and know what's expected of them. One of the other things that came up was one of the people on our table has set up an academy at a local college to give the sort of business view, and they help contribute towards the curriculum. And they found that they then get students from that college coming back into their workforce through work experience and then through the apprenticeship schemes, and that's benefited them greatly. And then one of the sort of final things that sort of really sort of showed was actually letting the apprentices show what they're good at. So instead of thinking they're coming in and not really knowing anything, is actually they might know more than you think, and usually on the tech side of things, letting them actually have a go, shine, show what they can do, because actually they could probably give back and teach a lot of the older people within the organisation a lot about stuff they probably don't know so much about, and they could do it in half the time. And that was sort of the main thing. I think there was one final one that was around linked to sort of what can apprentice do, and it's that it came up around the sort of generational, sort of how they are when they come into a business, and the lack of sort of that social skills, the interview skills, the communication skills that we've mentioned, and actually being able to work with them and sort of have a buddy system almost of someone that's maybe already four years down the line, to say to them, oh, actually, this is what it's like when you're in a board meeting, or this is how you have to conduct yourself in an interview, or when you come in, just sort of hold yourself in confidence. Don't come in instantly slouch in the seat, sort of present yourself in a way, but it's because they haven't been told that before. So you're coming in thinking, oh, they're not showing themselves in a way that's they should be, but it's probably because they don't know how they should. So just having someone that's actually a bit close to them in age, they don't feel like they're being told off. They're having sort of more advice one-to-one is a good way.
Yeah, I think just on the last thing actually I forgot to mention was around the retention and why, when you lose apprentices the most, it's in the early stages. So, and why is that? And that's probably down to poor onboarding, just not having that clarity. And as you say, people are a bit startled in the headlights and says, oh my God, I've got an apprentice, what am I going to do? I haven't got time for this. You're expecting me to do this report by the end of the week, and you're expecting me to manage that. How do I do that? So, and I love the idea of just having a visionary, someone who's a hero, or someone that who's apprentice inside the business that you can look up to and see that's the path I need to go, and that's the person I want to hook on to.
And that's something we touched on the last session around retention and upskilling, is actually being able to show an apprentice where they could go in their career from where they've started, and what their salary looks like. Because for young people, money seems to be one of the biggest drivers for why they stay and why they leave an organisation. So being able to show them that, okay, yeah, your mates working at this company might be on more than you at the moment, but this is where you could go in the next 5 years, and this is where your salary could get to.
I've got a quick question. Hands up. Who has been an apprentice? Okay, fair enough. It's probably about 20% of the room. It's interesting. Fair enough. Good.
Brilliant. Well, on the topic of questions, does anyone have any? I've got time for one or two. Yeah.
I've got a really, really basic question that I just don't know the answer to, and that is, it's around the levy. And basically, if we want to budget for X number of apprentices, we genuinely don't know how much they all cost.
Okay.
And each of the courses cost. And I just wonder, is there a kind of layman's terms breakdown?
Yes. So.
That's
Yeah, I can answer that one. So on the IFATE website, which is the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, each apprenticeship standard will say how much you can get from the apprentice levy towards this and how much the whole course costs. Usually it's how much the whole course costs, the apprenticeship levy should cover pretty much all of it. And then it would just be a case of how much are you going to have to spend to send that apprentice to the university if it's not on their doorstep, or are you going to have to support them with other additional training so that they can do their job, is the only other considerations. But yeah.
We're just tipping into the levy. We didn't have to even think about it before, so it's completely new. So if anyone's got any suggestions on that, thank you.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then there was a question just at the back there, yeah.
Yeah, in regards to obviously getting young people into manufacturing is massively important. The Manufacturing Open Day does a great deal for that. Is the policy team looking at any potential going into schools, doing more work with school teachers? Because I find that very few, let alone been in our industry, actually worked in any kind of industrial type jobs, and I think there's a huge weakness to the fund of future employees. And I think the Make UK team can do a lot around extending the thoughts around the Open Day to actually trying to influence government on the policy for education and education providers.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you're right, the National Manufacturing Days, it's a good starting point for that. And we do have teachers taking groups of school pupils into manufacturers. I think there are a couple of things. One is kind of work we do, and we're having lots of conversations with external groups. There's an organisation called STEM Learning, which does a lot of work around kind of CPD for school teachers, around STEM skills, but also kind of careers around that more broadly. So there are kind of bits of support there, and we know that the government is cutting some of the funding for teacher CPD, which is it's not going to help the situation that you describe. So kind of having that as a backstop, I think, is important. But agree, I think there's more that we can do in that space around, and it's not just teachers are important, but we're also having conversations around people like work coaches in job centres. Again, those sort of brokers of those kind of opportunities for young people or kind of working age adults to see what opportunities there are in the sector, what work in the sector looks like. So looking at all of those routes, teachers, as you say, is an important one. Just making sure that they have a really good understanding of what manufacturing work looks like, what their pupils might want to go into.
Great, thank you. Our panellists will probably be around for a little bit after the session, but I'm very conscious of time and that I'm already 3 minutes over. So thank you very much for coming, guys, and hopefully it was very useful to you, and I'll...